Well, good afternoon. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. I'm excited for today's conversation around opportunities related to industrial CO2 supply chain. And we're joined by Paul Gross, the CEO of Remora, and Josh Raglin of Norfolk Southern, Chief Sustainability Officer. Great to see you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Well, it's so fun to think of like an early stage startup like Remora and an iconic centuries old, train infrastructure, Norfolk Southern, right? So let's talk about this right at the outset. You two know each other, your companies know each other. What's the connection here? And maybe we'll start with you, Paul.
Well, Remora is building carbon capture technology for locomotives. So we're building a rail car that connects to a locomotive, filters the CO2 out of the exhaust, and then we actually produce beverage grade CO2 that we can go sell to food or beverage producers, greenhouses, water treatment. And we're working together because we actually just shared in the Wall Street Journal that Remora and Norfolk Southern are going to be partnering on one of the first ever deployments of carbon capture on a locomotive in the world. And we've actually known each other for 4 years. So this idea has been in the pipeline for a while.
Amazing. Well, Josh, talk about that a little bit, right? Like, so you've gotten to know Paul, you've heard about Remora, how did you help them maybe think about this? Was this did they come to you, or was this something you guys kind of ideated on a bit?
Yes, we've been around a little while, so we'll celebrate 200 years here in a couple of years. But we've been members of the Plug and Play Tech Center, and we occasionally meet with companies in the tech space with clean alternatives. And I met with Paul here 4 years ago. Really learned about what he was working on in the trucking space, and tried to plant the seed. Hey, Paul, those trucks, they can't have the weight, or they got weight restrictions. They don't use near as much fuel or storage capacity as diesel locomotives. Diesel locomotive holds 4,000 to 5,000 gallons of diesel. They've got to fuel up once a week, and we really don't have the weight restrictions. And we can also kind of keep locomotives captive to where you can offload them at the same location as you're, offload the CO2 at the same time you're fueling. So we were very intrigued by it, and Paul and I hadn't talked in a while, so he reached out last year and said, "Hey, you need to come to Detroit." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I've built something. We've got a stationary unit right now. We're getting into mobile carbon capture, and we think you'd be interested. So we went up there and took a look. And one of my head engineers, and we're very impressed with the team he's pulled together. Great advisory board, a lot of folks very respected in the rail industry, and now he's got 50 employees.
And raising money, it seems like, right?
Yeah, we raised $117 million. It was funny. We, after that conversation 4 years ago, Josh sent me this multi-paragraph email saying, "Hey, here are all the reasons that rail would be a good opportunity." And at the time, I was like, we're focused on semi-trucks. But as we started to think about that and learn more about the industry, we realized like, oh my God, that is an incredible idea. And that was ultimately a big part of the reason we decided to work on this.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Well, let's go back, Paul, a little bit on more of the origin story. Like, I feel like carbon capture itself is a challenge and a narrative to kind of convince people and to develop. You're doing a mobile, correct? Right? Like, so let's talk a little bit about that. Like, where and when did this idea hit you? What was the origin story? And where are things, today, and where are you headed?
I had the idea back when I was a senior at Yale. And honestly, the idea was sparked by two separate trains of thought. One was I was seeing all these news articles about CO2 shortages. I was seeing breweries couldn't get enough CO2 to make beer. There were huge shortages that caused
For a college kid, this is like
beer supply is getting proportions. So I said, this is an emergency. How can I help? And then simultaneously, I was interested in figuring out, well, how can we reduce transport emissions? Transport is the largest sector of emissions, and heavy-duty vehicles are a big part of the economy and a big part of the supply chain. We know that they're going to be around forever. So how can we help transport goods as efficiently as possible and as sustainably as possible? And I think I had a very naive idea that many people have had, which is, what if we just filtered the CO2 emissions out of the exhaust? But then I went down the rabbit hole, and then further down the rabbit hole, and then further down the rabbit hole, and ended up realizing, oh my God, I think this actually might be possible, where a lot of people had said, no, this is definitely a bad idea. So I started working on it, and ultimately, now we've built a working system with a truck engine at 90% capture efficiency.
So the original theory, obviously on truck, but now train is the kind of priority. Where Josh and Paul, where do you put the unit? How big is it? How is it working out now in practice and then testing and so on? Like, where are you on this kind of like, rubber hitting the road, if you will, no pun intended, I guess hitting the tracks.
The steel hitting the steel. So we're building a separate rail car. It's going to be 89 feet long, 430,000 pounds. So basically the size of a locomotive. And it sits behind the locomotive at the front of the train. And then we connect to the exhaust stack of the locomotive and transfer the exhaust back across the coupler. And on board our car, we're doing two things. The first is we're reducing the particulate matter and NOx emissions, so the criteria pollutants that can hurt people's lungs. And then the second thing we're doing is extracting and purifying the CO2. And as I said before, we're producing beverage grade CO2 that we can then offload. It's a liquid, so we can take that liquid, put it in a truck, and go sell it to a beverage producer. So that's the form factor. It's a separate car, and our goal is to make it as safe and seamless for railroad operations as possible. And that's why we wanted to partner with one of the largest railroads in the country, Norfolk Southern, so that we can build all of the operational considerations into the design rather than just shipping something off and saying, hey, does this work for you guys?
Yeah. And then in practice now, Josh, what do you think is the spectrum of opportunities, right? I mean, Norfolk Southern probably are shipping CO2 or dealing with companies that use CO2. So inherently, just even through the transit and through the operation of a locomotive, you're kind of building capacity to deliver in different locations, right? So how do you think about like the larger scale opportunity that this could afford you as well as your customers?
Yeah, we're definitely connected to the supply chain. So that's another area where we can support Remora as you go out and look for marketplace. And also as we think about pilot locations of where we'd want to implement this, it just makes sense. Go to places where CO2 is most needed, right? And so we operate in the eastern 22 states of the United States, a lot of industrial capacity, a lot of food and beverage as well. And so, we've got the capability there to support that. We'll say the carbon capture fits right into our science-based target initiative as well. As we think about alternative propulsion for locomotives, it's really hard to switch. And it's not just switching the locomotives, it's switching all the fueling infrastructure. And so a solution like this makes a lot more financial sense than going to something like overhead catenary or hydrogen or other means. So, just moving shipments from truck to rail, reduce emissions 75%. If we're able to get to a renewable diesel product, 100%, that's going to reduce another 75%. And then you throw in Remora's solution, and now we're like 97, 98%, reduction versus what a truck move would be. So if you want to talk about a pathway to net zero, this is pretty close of getting us there from a transport perspective.
And we could even create a carbon negative locomotive by pairing renewable diesel with carbon capture, where every mile that you transport a good, you're actually removing CO2 from the air. And the simple reason for that is you produce a renewable diesel from a renewable feedstock, like let's say a plant. The plant takes CO2 out of the air as it grows through photosynthesis. And then if we take that plant and turn it into fuel, burn the fuel and capture the CO2, well, now we've taken that CO2 molecule out of the air and sequestered it permanently. So you're actually removing CO2 from the air where it had already been emitted. And that's what carbon negative really means. And I think that's the opportunity I'm most excited about here.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that really appeals to us as well, Ken, is locomotives are very long-lived assets. So they'll last 25 years. You do a modernization, they're going to last another 25 years. So these are long-lived assets. It's hard to upgrade them quickly enough. Like trucking industry, they may turn over their fleet every 5 to 7 years. So for us to be able to get up to higher tier standards for removing NOx and PM, as Paul mentioned, this is a easy solution. So we could take a tier 0 locomotive up to tier 4 standards just with the capture unit. So that's to us is just as important, if not more so, than the carbon capture.
So Josh, take a step back real quick and give us a little bit of kind of background on Norfolk Southern's approach to sustainability, your role, how you spend your days normally, and then how Remora kind of fits into that kind of broader strategy that you have. You're talking about science-based backing and so on.
Yeah, so I operate all across all departments at Norfolk Southern. We were actually the first in the industry to create a chief sustainability officer in 2007. I worked closely with our first CSO from '07 until his retirement in 2015. I primarily worked in nature-based solutions, so a lot of ecosystem restoration projects, wetlands, streams, forest projects. I recently did a living shoreline project up in Virginia as well. So we've got a lot of real estate assets. So thinking about our real estate assets differently, to where you could produce unique revenue streams from those assets. So nature is very important for us. Addressing our locomotive diesel consumption, we're very incentivized to do that. That's our second largest expense. That's also 90% of our scope 1 and 2 emissions. So there's a lot of programs around fuel efficiency. I spent a lot of my time with our mechanical team, our supplier network as well, as we invest in new technologies, and also our fuel team as well. We also have a lot of facilities, buildings across our network. Buildings are around 40% of all GHG emissions, building those and operating those. And so really work closely with our facilities and energy team as we address that. The third area where we operate as is in circularity. So we do have a lot of long-lived assets. Think of rail cars, rail network. And we're very fortunate that we've got a source to be able to repurpose that material at the end of life. So last year, our waste diversion rate was over 80%. We set an all-time record for scrap metal recycling, 260,000 tons of scrap metal. And so we're very engaged in the recycling industry, the fuel industry. We've got a lot of connections because of the 4,000 shippers we have, the 4,000 receivers, and over 8,000 suppliers. So we can assist companies like Remora. Who do you want to connect with? Paul can give me a short list, and we've got connections there.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about it before we went live. I mean, we spend our time doing site selections for manufacturing companies, and more often than in the past, the idea of partnering with rail has kind of come up as something because of the real estate and supply chain connectivity, et cetera. So, Paul, as you think about this relationship, this is not kind of a do-gooder sustainability, nice for the planet kind of thing. This is a business opportunity economically for Remora and for Norfolk Southern. Talk a little bit about that. What is the business kind of opportunity here, broadly speaking?
That's right. So this system generates a revenue stream. We're selling the beverage grade CO2 that we're capturing, which means we're able to share that revenue with Norfolk Southern, and everyone makes money off of this situation. We're not just doing this to reduce emissions. We're doing this because the unit economics make sense. And I think that's the strongest sustainability solution. One where unit economics make sense, one that works operationally, that's safe, that's seamless. That's our goal. I think if you are asking someone to pay a green premium for a solution, you need to revisit your business model and start again, because ultimately a scalable solution is one where everyone's generating revenue and the emissions reduction is in tandem with the revenue generation.
Yeah. So dive a little further. Like, why hasn't the kind of mobile carbon capture taken off in the past? Like, why do you think now this moment works? Why did your technology work? How does it relate maybe to doing it on train versus truck or any other type of, modality?
Well, one of the challenges with carbon capture is that historically it's been a liquid solvent that is used to strip the CO2 out of the exhaust. So carbon capture is actually 100 years old. It's been around for a long time, but it just had
a real Norfolk Southern.
Norfolk Southern still has another century on carbon capture. But carbon capture is pretty old, and we haven't seen it scale because these liquid solvents that are used are corrosive, they're volatile. When they degrade, they can release carcinogens, and they just aren't a good fit when your exhaust flow rate changes rapidly. And that's what you see on a mobile application. On a locomotive, you're gonna go from notch 8 to notch 1 to notch 5, all these different load settings, and you need a system that can adjust very rapidly to those changes. So what we've done is completely changed the technology approach in order to fit the mobile application. So we're actually using a solid sorbent, which is basically a little pellet. You can picture it's the size of a pea, and we flow the exhaust through a cylinder filled with these pellets, and the CO2 molecules get stuck in those pellets. Once That cylinder fills up, then you switch the exhaust over to another cylinder filled with pellets. You start capturing CO2 there, and you vacuum the CO2 out of that first cylinder. So you're always capturing CO2 in one cylinder while you're vacuuming CO2 out of the other, and then you just switch back and forth. And because of the way that system's set up, because the pellets are just static, it works for mobile applications. It works for intermittent flow rates. You're not going to get the amine liquid sloshing around. And that's what's unlocked the mobile application. Now, to the second part of your question, okay, why hasn't anyone else thought of that? Well, there's been a huge breakthrough in solid porous sorbents just in the last couple years that allows this to be possible. And we're actually partnering with one of the leading professors in the space who invented a new sorbent that solves a lot of the existing problems with sorbents.
Interesting. So where are you? So you've just raised a lot of money. You've kind of got a proof of concept. You've got Josh on board.
Yep.
Where are you in your manufacturing, your production? How many of your, of your products can actually now be attached to Norfolk Southern trains? Like what's the kind of timeline? Where are you today? Where are you headed with Norfolk Southern and beyond?
So we have a system that's at truck scale at 90% capture efficiency, producing high purity CO2. So we've completely validated the technology. The next step is to take that truck scale system and scale it up for a locomotive. So we are currently doing that in our parking lot. We actually built a rail spur into our parking lot, and we bought an old locomotive for testing. So we've got our locomotive out in the parking lot, and we're building the system right now. It's actually going to be substantially complete by the end of August, and it'll be fully complete by the end of October. So we're ahead of the timeline that I previously shared with Josh. And then we'll be shipping off our first units early next year. So, I mean, we are really cranking, and we just need to prove that the technology can work at locomotive scale, and then we'll start shipping off and proving that it can work operationally. And it's so important to us to do that as soon as possible because, again, this solution has to work operationally. Otherwise, you can have all the fancy technology you want. It doesn't matter.
One of the things we talked a lot about with Paul and his team is just the connection, between the locomotive exhaust and the captured unit is just getting that right. With trains have a lot of different forces that are involved there, and as they move around, going across the network. So you got to have something flexible enough, but yet rigid enough that it'll stay intact. So that's kind of one of the challenges that we'll work together to overcome that. And I think as we think about operationally, Ken, most people don't realize that we share locomotives with other Class 1 railroads. So any one time, 10% of our locomotives will be on another railroad, and 10% of the locomotives we're operating are someone else's. So as you think about locations to put these devices, we're going to be really careful about that. We're going to think about locations that are kind of captive service. So for us, we think about trains that go back and forth regularly. So a couple of near-term opportunities is intermodal. We serve all the over 50 ports in the Eastern United States, and a lot of those go to inland ports, and those trains go back and forth every single day. So that's a great use case as well. We also are the largest shipper of finished automobiles. And so those empty units are returned 100% of the time back to the plant. And so that's a great use case as well. So how can we help decarbonize our own selves, but also who are those shippers out there that may be willing to partner, in something like this as well? And those intermodal customers are a lot of consumer-facing brands, just like the automotive OEMs.
So as you think about this CO2 offtake and that consumer base in the beverage industry and beyond, are those buyers lined up? Do you have kind of offtake agreements already in place? Has that conversation started? So like once you get on rail in the fall and winter and get proof of concept and test it out, Paul, you guys are ready to go?
We have offtake agreements signed. So we have CO2 buyers in place. And one of the great things about the partnership with Norfolk Southern is that a lot of NS operations are in areas where there isn't enough CO2 supply. One of the interesting things about CO2 in the US is there's actually a shortage in many parts of the country. There are these deserts of supply because a lot of the supply comes from the Midwest, and CO2 is hard to transport. So in the East Coast and the West Coast, particularly in Florida and the Northeast, you've got real lack of CO2 supply. And that's where we can retrofit into NS operations and create this new, reliable, sustainable source for a lot of the CO2 end users who otherwise just wouldn't be able to get enough supply.
Which is something like I think so counterintuitive, right? Like, the CO2 side of it isn't something you would think of as like being in shortage. But this being like a kind of national rail network, access to other, sister rail networks, etc. Interesting.
Totally. It's so counterintuitive, but yet when you talk to CO2 buyers, 3/4 of them say they can't buy enough CO2 to meet their needs at least once a year. And we're actually mining CO2 out of the ground, underground deposits to meet the existing market requirements. 1/4 of all the CO2 in the US is mined out of the ground. The biggest supplier of CO2 in the US is an inactive volcano in Mississippi. So I think we need to build a better and more sustainable CO2 supply chain for everyone involved.
Yeah. And train cars are going to run no matter what all across America, right? I mean,
Not great.
the numbers must be staggering, Josh, of the potential that you could just generate and, be pulling out. So amazing. So let's dive in real quick. I sit in DC. There was obviously a lot of focus during the Biden administration around incentives, Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, infrastructure. There's this real kind of moment of manufacturing resurgence and innovation and technology that seems to be happening across the country, whether it's reshoring, new technologies, etc. Not only the energy sector, but transportation, defense, etc. How do you think about a DC strategy, Paul? Like, what do you need from Washington? What is your message to policymakers? Is it around incentives? Is it around regulation? What's your kind of call to action for folks on the policy side?
Well, carbon capture is in a unique position because it's a totally bipartisan priority. We saw the 45Q tax credit for carbon capture was originally created by President Obama. It was dramatically expanded by President Trump in his first term, expanded again by President Biden. And then in the One Big Beautiful Bill, it is the only tax credit that is essentially unchanged as all of the others are getting phased out. And that's because everyone understands we need a reliable CO2 supply chain in the US. Oil and gas is one of the largest users of CO2. So if we want to produce more energy domestically, we need CO2. And then also, we are creating so many new American manufacturing jobs to build these systems. We're here in Detroit, Michigan. We're creating a lot of jobs here, but we're also going to create jobs across the country. Folks transporting CO2, offloading CO2, and as we expand our production footprint. So we are really excited to work with anyone and everyone in the federal government to make this successful. And we have seen a lot of bipartisan support for this solution.
Creating jobs resonates, whether that's federal level or state level. We do a lot of economic development activity ourselves. We've got over 500 projects in our pipeline, of either existing companies we're working with or new companies that are looking to build facilities, and that supports the trades. It supports, the economies. Over 80% of our employees are craft workforce. They're blue collar jobs that are mechanics and electrical engineers and things of that line. And so really supporting that is really important for us as an organization because we need more trade skills.
Yeah, I want to give you a few more minutes actually to dive in a little bit more on that, Josh, because when we do site selection nationally, our presentation is called People, Power, Place, right? Like the power part of just the manufacturing that needs to be sorted out, especially in light of data centers and demands on AI. The place aspect is really the ecosystem and other opportunities, but the people side, let's talk about that for a second, right? Because your rail networks are so expansive, there's job creation opportunity. Like talk about that. Talk about some initiatives maybe you'd had in Pennsylvania and Georgia and so on. And how are you looking to kind of further add to that conversation around reskilling, vocational education, training, et cetera? And maybe if you have a call to action on what, state, local, federal policymakers should be thinking about in a different way to help meet the people demand for your business as well as for new emerging technologies like Remora.
Yes, our industrial development team works with a lot of site selectors all across our 22 states. We've actually created new tools on our website. One's called Insights, and think of it as like Zillow for industrial sites. If you're looking for a rail serve site, whether we own it or someone else does, we can connect you, and we've got real people that you can talk to and connect to through our website as well that can help you find sites. And then we work with the economic development folks in each of the states and even at the local level as well. To support job creation. We've started a grant program here a couple of years ago, supporting technical schools, supporting high schools as well, that are developing welding programs, for example. We even announced a recent support of a local nonprofit here in Atlanta. We've got our training center here, and it's the only accredited certification center for welders in the state of Georgia. And so we're going to work with them to put more welders in the workforce, and hopefully we'll be able to pick some of those up eventually. So it's really important for us as working to create jobs, support the economy, because we need workers as well, skilled workers.
So, Paul, the momentum seems to be strong. You got good tailwinds, kind of with partners like Norfolk Southern, economic viability and kind of pathway. How do you think about growth? Right, like where is Remora headed? How do you think about talent acquisition and meeting the technical skills that are going to be required just to kind of like help you scale and grow and innovate? I mean, is it going to be high tech jobs? Is there a gap? Are you worried about that? How are you thinking about your own growth and then also maybe the labor days?
Well, we're scaling very quickly. We've raised a ton of capital. We have these incredible commercial partners, and we are getting this technology into the market as quickly as we can. So that means creating a lot of new jobs, both here in Detroit, but also, as I mentioned, in other parts of the country. I would say we are very fortunate to be in the absolute mecca of the skilled trades. And I mean, we have just such incredible electricians and welders and fabricators at our disposal. That said, there's still a gap. We need more people going to trade schools. We are partnering with local community colleges to offer better programs. And then, as Josh was mentioning, we want to be the beneficiary of some of those programs. And simultaneously, we need more skilled mechanical engineers and electrical engineers and chemical engineers. And Detroit is a great place for that. But we're also pulling a lot of folks from other parts of the country, especially from the oil and gas industry. There's so much great talent in that industry who we are pulling into our work, building a system to retrofit onto the oil and gas infrastructure. I think longer term for Remora, we're building a big carbon capture company, and trucks and trains are our starting point, but ultimately we're building a modular carbon capture system that can work in many applications, whether it's on a container ship or even on reciprocating engine with natural gas, on a generator, on a big turbine. There are so many different places that we can put this solution. And the reason that we're starting with trucks and rail is that's where we have the strongest commercial partnerships, and that's going to be the fastest to deploy.
Yeah.
And another thing I was going to add is along with that is Norfolk Southern just recently launched a scholarship program called Trades on Track. And anyone either out of vocational school now or going to one that it ties into the rail industry somehow, whatever you're going to go learn, we've got a scholarship program that's open. So I would encourage listeners to reach out to our website there, go on the corporate giving link, and there's an application form for students to fill out.
That's amazing.
You can go learn skills and go work for a company like Remora or Norfolk Southern.
Yeah. So let's for a couple of minutes real quick on Norfolk Southern side, right? Like, could you envision a Remora, product on every single Norfolk Southern, train around the country? Is that the vision? I mean, is this just kind of table stakes for the future potentially?
It's going to be interesting. I think we're going to learn a lot over the course of the next few years, how we operationalize it. Eventually you could. You had tenders buying locomotives, back in the, late 1800s. With wood to start with, and then eventually coal. I think we could have tenders now that are cleaning the air. So I think you could. I think to get to scale, I mean, if we could get a couple of hundred units on our network, that would be a really, really good start. And then we'll just have to go from there. So that we operationalize.
Right, for the audience, how big's your network? You say a couple hundred, like it's no big deal.
If you're around 3,000 locomotives.
3,000 locomotives.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Amazing. Yeah, that's why
the scale here is really incredible. And, our goal is, of course, to put a system on every locomotive. And I think we can get there too. But I also want to, reinforce just the challenge of that. And that's why we're partnering on this. There's so many different use cases here, and railroads are incredibly complex. There's a lot of operational nuance, and every rail yard is different. Every train is different. Every region is different. And so we take that very seriously. And that's why we've built all of these partnerships with people that have decades of experience in the industry. I think we were not just going to be slapping this onto every train, right? We have to really learn about how the operations of these railroads work so that this can be a seamless solution.
it's a hard issue / question call, but like how much time and energy is devoted to, hey, we got to get this out there for Norfolk Southern versus, okay, we still need to incubate and think about trucks. Okay, we need to start thinking about shipping and maybe Maersk and, shipping networks and then airplanes and bicycle. Like, how do you kind of like think through like the magnitude and potential without kind of, losing sight of like the immediate kind of task at hand, but also starting at least a process of innovation for the broader potential of what seems to be a super unique kind of technology that's hitting the right moment?
I think you have to stay focused on one thing at a time. You have to do one thing well before you can do many things. So that is our focus. We want to build a really phenomenal system for our partnership with Norfolk Southern, and then we can scale and expand our focus from there. But this is a big challenge already. So we want to make sure that we're not spreading ourselves too thin. At the same time, the good news is that our core technology is going to be the same for any application. So a lot of the work that we're doing to make the system capture more CO2, more energy efficient, to make it smaller, to make it cheaper, that will be applicable regardless of the application. And that will be driving all these other possibilities forward, even as we focus primarily on our rail application.
So Josh, I find this to be just such a fascinating kind of dynamic of this conversation. Like we were getting to know Paul, and then the idea of actually doing a joint conversation with Norfolk Southern was exciting for us because I think it's just a testament that even a 200-year-old company is thinking about the future, planning, innovating, and embracing, opportunities to test like this. How often are you all doing this type of kind of partnership? How do you think about engaging and staying ahead of fast evolving technologies? And is that through your department, across the organization?
Yeah, I would say it's a cross organization, but I lead a lot of those engagements as we think about clean tech. I've got a lot of folks that reach out to me, a lot of folks through LinkedIn. Sure. I also support startup companies in the tech space, such as the Advanced Technology Development Center located just down the street at Georgia Tech. So we've got 28 clean tech companies currently in the program, 160 startups altogether that are currently working in the space. So it's really interesting. So we have quarterly engagements with a handful of those companies, really learn how we can support them, whether that be through just idea creation, providing guidance, and even potentially even looking at their products to co-brand with or co-develop. So I think it's interesting because the startups can, they're very nimble. They can move quickly. Big companies don't always. We don't necessarily have big R&D teams like we did back in the day. So we really depend on small startup companies to bring ideas to us and help drive value across organization and drive advancements in sustainability. Most of the issues we have in sustainability are tech challenges.
Yeah, that sounds to me. Well, Paul, as we kind of wind down, I mean, what can we expect from Remora over the next 12 months? Are you looking for more partnerships? Well, what's your kind of focus? What should folks be paying attention for?
In the next 12 months, you can expect our first locomotive scale carbon capture system, which we're so excited about. So that's going to be the big news. Stay tuned.
If you're having to smash a coffee cup against the train, you let me know, Josh.
We'll call you in for the coffee cup. And that's the big focus for us right now is getting that system built. We're heads down, again, trying to do one thing well. And from there, I think it really is moving into scaling our manufacturing, and that will start here in Detroit, but it will expand very rapidly. We're very excited about the opportunity with all of our commercial partners, both on the rail side and on the trucking side. In addition to Norfolk Southern, we also partner with Union Pacific, Genesee and Wyoming, these great railroads, Anacostia Rail Holdings. And then on the trucking side, we're partnered with Ryder and Werner and Estes. So there's just this huge amount of scalability potential. And you can see in the next 12 months, some of that starting up.
Yeah. And people just saying, all right, make it.
Exactly.
Well, listen, we've really just loved where we've taken our little, coffee conversation series in focus on this innovation and what's happening in the world. And I think really kind of over the last year, it really kind of shifted to just kind of like this reindustrialization and manufacturing in America. And it's a pleasure to have both of you on. It's so exciting to see new companies and technologies like Remora. And then also kind of talk with folks like Josh and Norfolk Southern, legacy iconic American companies. So kudos to both of you. Excited to kind of actually see product out there on the rails one day in the near future. And until then, appreciate you joining us on Coffee with Ken. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow us at coffeewithken.com. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks so much, guys. All right. We'll see you soon.